Chapter 36, The End of the Calm. It was late in the night. The old master-at-arms had finally managed to get the young masters and mistresses off his tail, and was now quietly sitting at his desk, with a look filled with worry. He was currently thinking of what he should do with Maya, his old student's daughter. Within his mind, he was torn between a few different choices. The first was to send her away and find a way for her to live safely, someplace where she wouldn't be recognized. Unfortunately, at the moment, the old man was being watched carefully by many. So far, none of the young men and women who had occupied the building had either left or had been sent away, so the first one would definitely raise some people's brows in curiosity. His second choice was to keep her within his building. Only then would he have the chance to protect her in case she had been recognized. And if she did end up being found out, he could still try to plead with the king to spare her. Another choice, proposed by the old alchemist himself, was to make her join the gold cauldron, where the old alchemist would have been able to protect her for him, but he crossed that idea out right away. The old alchemist was one of his oldest friends, and asking him to take care of someone related to a traitor was too dangerous a favor to ask, even if he had offered. On the other side of the building, within a room just as big as the old master-at-arms, the old alchemist sat in silence. In front of him was a large cauldron, and under this cauldron, a dense green flame slowly danced. The old alchemist seemed focused on preparing something. A big wooden ladle stirred the contents of the cauldron gently, while one ingredient after another appeared right next to the old alchemist's hand and slowly floated into it. All these ingredients were spiritual plants, and their worth was extremely high, but the old alchemist didn't appear to be feeling the burn on his wallet. And instead, he looked like he had been simply cooking breakfast. The night was a quiet one. The neighborhood festivity had just finished, and the streets were peaceful and devoid of people. The only noises came from the very same building, inside and around which various groups of disciples, young masters, and mistresses mingled under the bright moonlight. Amongst these various groups, one composed of 2 young men and 4 young girls, sat at the feet of a large tree. They were Rayla, Finn, Maya, Riri, Miri, and Nilo. The 6 were chatting happily under the moonlight while enjoying small servings of food, which Rayla and Maya had prepared. "So, what's wrong between the 2 of you?" asked Rayla curiously while looking at Finn and Miri. Riri couldn't bear to listen to Finn and Miri bicker anymore, so the moment Rayla asked, she hissed and looked away. She tried to change the topic and start a conversation with Maya, but then she heard Nilos laugh. "Ha ha ha, you got to hear that story." So, Nilo then recounted the story behind Finn's and Miri's bad blood. Apparently, the 2 had been an on and off couple since they had been kids, and each of their breakups had a funny story behind. For the next few minutes, laughter and shouts could be heard in the building's garden. Until suddenly, within the city of Fury, the heads of each and every cultivator above the 6th rank rose rapidly. They had all collectively felt an abnormality coming from the direction of Master Kai's building. The first ones to notice this abnormality were the old alchemist and the old master-at-arms. The old alchemist immediately gave up control over the flame, completely ruining the ingredients within the cauldron, and therefore failing the process of making whatever he was trying to make. He then disappeared from his room and reappeared in the air above the building. The moment he appeared in midair, the old master-at-arms appeared as well on the opposite side of the building. The 2 seemed to be keeping watch on the hotel while also observing what was happening. The abnormality that attracted the attention of every expert within the city was not visible to the eyes, and for anyone who wasn't in the immediate vicinity, it was only a faint feeling. Yet, the shock it caused was beyond what anyone had felt before. A huge vortex had formed within the building. What caught people's attention was the nature of this vortex, as it did not attract physical items, but instead attracted mana. Mana had always been omnipresent in the world, as everything that existed had its distinctive type of mana, including men and beasts, whose types of mana were called ki and beast essence. This vortex did not forcefully absorb the mana in the surroundings. It simply attracted it. What the expert within Fury had felt was a sudden, faint instability within their ki, which seemed to be slowly moving to the direction of the building, as if magnetically attracted. Unable to extract the mana from physical things, the only mana that forcefully made its way towards the center of the vortex was the one that had the ability to move its carrier's body, like the essences of wind, starlight, moonlight, and that of the water particles present within the air. That had caused a beautiful phenomenon around the building. A massive number of droplets of water, which shone with bright and multicolored light, were being carried by the wind into the vortex. It looked as if millions of small stars were merging into a massive and brighter one. The cultivators within the building felt their ki forcefully pressing against the skin in the direction of the middle of the vortex, but ultimately unable to push its way through. It was as if their body had become a huge compass, whose needle constantly pointed in the direction of the vortex. Outside of the building, a large number of cultivators started to appear above the roofs of the surrounding buildings. They had all come close to observing the abnormality. The city lord was also amongst them. Some of them seemed fairly worried, while others felt only interest and curiosity for what was happening. The two old men were still quietly floating in the air. None of the observing parties dared to go closer than they were, either for a matter of respect or for fear. Of course, not all of them feared the two old men. The worried ones among the crowd were those who had sent their children or disciples to study under the old man, and if it came to their safety, they would be willing to start a fight with the two masters. Master Kai, Lord Noala, what's happening here? Asked a middle-aged woman respectfully to the two old men. A stout middle-aged man, standing above one of the surrounding buildings, added, "Are our children safe?" Worry couldn't be hidden within his voice. The old alchemist looked at the crowd and answered in a low and serious voice. "We don't know. It doesn't seem to be harmful, so keep your distance for now. We'll save your children if need be." Within the building, inside one of the many cultivation rooms, Daniel kept cultivating while unaware of the events. In fact, he didn't seem to be conscious at all. He had been trying to force his spirit into breaking through to the fourth rank for more than an hour, and right when he believed he was close to succeeding, his consciousness had slowly faded into oblivion. This wasn't the first time Daniel had entered this state. The first time had been when he had reached perfection of the body and perfection of his spirit's connection. This state made him lose direct control over his cultivation, and yet it didn't stop it. The last time Daniel had advanced through this method of cultivation, his body had become much more suited to the presence of spiritual essence, to a point where his body and the essence didn't seem to be in contrast at all. In the past few days, he had gone back into wondering what kind of change reaching rank 4 in martial cultivation has to completely revert the tuning of his body and spirit. But, unable to find an answer, he was always forced to put this question aside. If Daniel had been conscious right now, he would have finally found out the answer he had longed for so long. While Daniel sat quietly in cultivation, the massive amount of mana attracted in the surrounding started to invade his body ruthlessly. The excessive mana, devoid of control, was rapidly absorbed by the spiritual plane through his perfect connection with his spirit. The roaming essences of the spiritual plane, ki and mana, started to change Daniel's body physiology. His body was being refined and forced to advance by the impetuous ki, which was constantly being produced by every bit of his body, and yet his ki couldn't hinder the just as powerful refinement of his spirit. The two types of refinement were so powerful that if Daniel's body hadn't been pre-refined this same way once before, his body would have been destroyed and his spirit dissipated. Martial cultivation strengthened one's body, turning it into a prison for the spirit, while spiritual cultivation used one's weak body as a vessel to connect their powerful spirit to the spiritual plane. In comparison, a martial cultivator's body was like a porcelain vase, while a spiritual cultivator was like a balloon. A vase couldn't contain too much water, as being hard, it couldn't expand. At the same time, a balloon couldn't become as resistant as a vase, as it is required to be elastic in order to contain the increasing amount of air within. But what was happening to Daniel was as if both the container and the content couldn't stop the other's refinement. The only thing they could do was to change and adapt to the other's change. his spirit became denser, and his body, while still becoming stronger, was slowly being refined around the presence of spiritual essence. It was early in the morning outside, and the tens of experts were still standing near the vortex. The moment the sun had risen in the sky, the sunlight essence had joined the water and winds, giving it a bright shine, which turned observing the vortex much more difficult. Chatter had filled the neighborhood for the past few hours, as the many confused cultivators shared their own theories about this strange phenomenon. The only two that kept quiet were the two old men. Since the beginning, they had kept on quietly floating in the air, while demarcating a non-traversable line with their own bodies. Suddenly, the chatting noises lessened, as everyone felt something change within the vortex. Spiritual cultivators were extremely sensitive to mana, so the moment they felt the attraction of the surrounding mana lessen, they noticed it immediately. On the contrary, what alerted the martial cultivators was the behavior of their internal ki, which, while before was almost trying to push its way out of their bodies to rush to the middle of the vortex, now was slowly calming down instead. The chatter stopped abruptly. The eyes of every person present on the scene were directed towards the part of the building where the vortex seemed to have been generated, specifically one of the cultivation rooms. The vortex kept slowing down until the attraction was too feeble to keep attracting the essences in the surrounding, therefore making the drops of water fall on the ground like weak rain. The winds that were previously being attracted by the vortex were quietly pushed away by new incoming gushes, and the sunlight that seemed to focus on the building was now dimming and returning to shine evenly on each part of the city. Under the attentive eyes of the city's experts, the door of the cultivation room opened, and from it, a young-looking man stepped out quietly. Chapter 37, The Arrival of the Storm. Tens of eyes were glued on Daniel's body the second he stepped out of the cultivation room. The old master-at-arms, the old alchemist, the city lord, and almost every sect, school of martial arts, or family leader within the city were now looking at Daniel in curiosity. A natural phenomenon was rare, but not unusual, while an abnormality during cultivation, which was no small matter, especially in theory. In the past, the city had been known as the City of Abnormalities, as almost every single cultivation singularity recorded in time had, in fact, happened here. And there was a simple reason for it: the catering tree. Most unranked citizens might have let the stories of the catering tree turn into myths and legends, but within the archives of the various powers, many such events had been recorded. Like when a swordsman of the past, who, after managing to obtain one of the tree's blessings during the breakthrough to the 7th rank, had lost control of his sharp, untamable ki, he was only able to watch as, in the end, it exploded, turning everything within a radius of 100 meters into pieces and killing hundreds of people. Or when a spiritual cultivator, thousands of years ago, had turned the entire city into a frozen land while achieving perfection in the spiritual synchronization stage. Many of these types of events had contributed to the increase of fierce fame within not only the kingdom, but the entire continent. Tonight's event had reignited something within the hearts of these powerful cultivators. And as they looked at this young man, casually walking out of the middle of a cultivation anomaly, they felt their hearts beat in excitement. Both the old master-at-arms and the old alchemist had wide smiles on their faces. From each of their perspectives, Daniel had picked their cultivation path. But as fast as those smiles grew, they disappeared right after. The first ones to notice that something was amiss were those in the crowd at the 7th rank of cultivation. No matter which kind of cultivator, their eyes slowly opened wide in shock. The kind of shock a person who had just seen an impossibility take place would have. Martial cultivators noticed the young man's vibrant ki and body at first, and from what they could see, he had just reached the 4th rank of martial cultivation. They then noticed how his spiritual essence was being emanated by his body. Clear sign of the 4th rank of spiritual cultivation. Instead, the first thing spiritual cultivators sensed was the oddly pure spiritual essence that lingered around Daniel's body, making it look as if he were steaming. They then noticed how pure his ki and the level of refinement of his body. For the next few minutes, complete silence reigned supreme within the entire area. The first ones to react were the old alchemist and the old master at arms. They dashed towards Daniel and landed next to him. The others who had reached the 7th rank approached as well, but didn't get too close to Daniel. They simply looked at him as if they were looking at a mythical beast. The rank 6 martial and spiritual cultivators stayed for a while, then left to report the situation to their own powers and backers within the kingdom. The area around Daniel started to get crowded with the most powerful figures within the city of Fury. The first person who talked to him was the old alchemist. "What the hell happened to you?" he said with shock still present in his voice. Daniel looked at the two old men in confusion and said, I don't know. I blacked out for a moment. And when I woke up, I just came out of the room. And here I am." He decided not to hide anything. The brat is lying. Reaching both nigh inhuman and spiritual synchronization stages at the same time is impossible. Search him. He must have had a lucky encounter. He must be hiding a secret about himself. Barked viciously an old man hidden under a black cape within the crowd. Another cultivator, dressed in a white martial artist attire, looked at the previous old man with disdain and said, "What the hell are you blathering about? You're a spiritual cultivator. You can feel the air inside every pocket of the kid. How would he be able to hide anything from you?" He then looked at Daniel and said, "Can you tell us what you did before attempting your breakthrough?" Daniel looked at the old master at arms and at the old alchemist, and after seeing them nod, he looked at the white-dressed man and responded, "I've used 2 partially consumed rank 4 beast cores to cultivate." He then paused for a second, then continued, "This isn't the first time Eve blacked out during cultivation. It also happened when I've reached perfection." A woman within the crowd looked at Daniel and shouted, "Stop spewing crap. How old are you? How can you have reached perfection?" The old master at arms waved his hand at the woman to shut her up, then looked at Daniel. "Perfection of which path?" he asked. "Both," said Daniel. "Huh, that's rich," exclaimed the old man hidden under the black cape. "In order to reach perfection with both paths of cultivation, you need to be as old as I am." A quiet old woman approached the old alchemist and the old master at arms. She slightly nodded at them and said, "Vice President Noala, you know me, am a doctor. Would you mind if I checked his body? I just want to verify his age." The old alchemist didn't know this woman. She was a fairly well-known doctor and part of his group, Golden Cauldron. He quickly nodded at the woman and allowed her to get closer. Daniel knew that the old alchemist wouldn't have put him in danger, so as the woman approached, he offered his arm and allowed her to check his pulse. After a brief examination, the woman turned to the silent crowd and simply uttered a few words. "He is definitely not over 15 years old." The shock in her face was unmistakable. She wasn't alone, as after hearing her words, every single one of these powerful cultivators' mouths gaped in shock. "That's not all." She then added, "His body is not that of a normal martial cultivator. His spiritual essence, it's not restrained by his body. If a normal martial cultivator's body is like a stone pool from which water can't come out, his body is like fine sand. Has this ever happened? Did anyone ever try to reach perfection in both cultivation paths at the same time and then break through the 4th rank?" asked the man dressed in white. A robust, middle-aged man with a greatsword strapped on his back took a step forward and said, "Who would want to be stuck at the 3rd rank for 60, maybe 70 years? He not only was right, but unbeknownst to his unbeknownst, he had also recognized the reason why nobody had ever managed to discover a way to cultivate both paths, and that was time. Usually, these men and women would have been shocked by Daniel's inhuman speed of cultivation. But right now, with the prospect of having just witnessed the birth point of a new era of cultivation, all they could think was to ask themselves, can this be replicated? While the sound of discussion buzzed in the air, Daniel quietly looked at his profile. Dan Heel, Karmic System. Age 14 rank. Early rank 4 of martial cultivation, perfect body. Early rank 4 of spiritual cultivation, perfect connection. Karma, 1412. Weapons masteries, details, Martial arts, details, skills, details, spells, details, reap what you've sown. Time is precious. LV. One system upgrades, details. It was true. Daniel had really managed to break through both paths of cultivation. He hid his excitement deep inside and looked at his two teachers. The two old men looked at him, then looked at each other. The old master-at-arms cleared his throat and looked at the city lord. He then said in a loud voice, which caught the attention of the entire crowd, "Keep a secret what you've just heard. The city lord will inform the governor of what has happened, which will then make the matter known to the king." His voice then turned more serious than ever. "If words of this reach a bordering kingdom, a war will break out. And if that happens, the first to pay for it will be the present." The robust man with the greatsword looked at the old master-at-arms and asked, "What about the kid?" The old master-at-arms responded right away, "The kid is our student. He'll stay here until we hear words from the king." After a slight pause, he continued by saying, "I expect a lot of you to help if anything were to happen in the meantime." The old master-at-arms didn't want to accuse anyone, but he couldn't be sure that none of these powerful cultivators would attempt to do something to Daniel before the king came to know of the situation. The old man's suspicions were not only right, but also came too late, as both the woman doctor and the man with the greatsword were, in fact, spies of two different neighboring kingdoms. Within their minds, tens of different plans on how to report their discoveries to their homelands were formulated, and unfortunately, none of those plans included leaving Daniel alone. After receiving a quick agreement from the various cultivators, the crowd dispersed. A few hours later, inside the old man's private room, Daniel, the old alchemist, and the old master-at-arms himself sat around a table. "This is quite a problem," said the old alchemist while stroking his beard. Daniel kept quiet as he listened to the conversation between his two teachers. The old master-at-arms slowly rotated a small spoon inside his teacup. His expression was spiritless. He then looked back at the old alchemist and said, "He would be safe with your father, but His Majesty would never allow that. The city lord will inform him that you are here. He would expect it." The old alchemist nodded in agreement, then looked at Daniel and said, "Even monsters should have limits." Daniel. He then forced a faint smile out. After a few minutes of quiet, he added, "A deal is a deal. You're a spiritual cultivator, so technically you are still my student." As he finished saying that, a small ring appeared in his hand. He then handed it over to Daniel while saying, "This is my gift for you." Daniel took the ring off the old alchemist's hand, and as his attention was focused on the small ring, he felt the old man's bony hands weakly patting his shoulder. The old master-at-arms got up on his feet, with a face which seemed to have just managed to recover a bit of color. He walked right up against Daniel and put another small ring on his hand, right next to that of the old alchemist. "And hey, race mine." Daniel looked at the two rings in surprise. He had already come in contact with items which had been enchanted with spatial essence. And while he had never seen one the shape of a ring, he still felt the similarity to the spatial bag he had been given to store the prey during his hunting trip. He looked at the two, and with a grateful expression, he bowed deeply while saying, "Thank you, masters." A grim smile appeared on the faces of the two old men, but just for a moment. They had no idea of what the king would do after learning about Daniel. He might be imprisoned, and experiments might be conducted on him. Yet, not wanting to worry Daniel for now, they decided to give him some cultivation resources and decided to let him have a few happy days before his situation would change drastically. The news would reach the king in 2 months, and one thing was sure. That was the time they had to find a way to keep Daniel safe. After spending a few more minutes with his teachers, Daniel left the private room of the old master-at-arms and went to see his sister. As he walked through the corridors, his expression turned grim, and anxiousness started to squeeze his heart tighter at every step. Chapter 38: Impressive Gains. Within his room, Daniel was sitting quietly on his bed. In his hands were the 2 rings given to him by his teachers. Daniel hadn't had many encounters with spatial essence. The only time he had managed to examine it for a few minutes was when he had been in the hunting grounds of the canyons. Unfortunately, the spatial bag was only given to hunters to store prey, and therefore, it had limitations. Each pocket of a spatial bag was enchanted and allowed a different hunter to store their prey. Each hunter was able to store and check the content of their personal storage pockets by using their key. What they were unable to do was to withdraw a previously stored item and store anything that wasn't beast cores and carcasses. The reason for that was to prevent unhappy hunters from asking for their items back, or for unauthorized hunters from coming to hunting grounds owned by the Huntsman Guild. Daniel wore one of the rings and pushed his key into it. The next moment, what he saw was the familiar empty room he had seen within the spatial bag. The only difference was that the ring's space was much larger. While the storage pocket within their spatial bag had a space of 10 square meters, both of these rings contained a space at least 10 times larger. Inside the first ring space, Daniel saw many different items. Inside the ring given by the old master at arms, about 10 weapon racks were placed to the sides of the room. Each weapon rack was filled with a different kind of good quality weapon. Some had swords, some had polearms, bows, and many other kinds of weapons. To the side of each of these weapon racks was a stack of books that taught the corresponding weapon mastery. In the middle of the space was a crate, inside which beast cores of various ranks were stored. Daniel didn't start counting at that moment, but after a simple glance, he had guessed that there were about 20 rank 4 beast cores, about 100 rank 3, and many more rank 2 beast cores. Finally, next to the crate was a small table, above which were various books of martial arts, which the old master-at-arms wanted him to practice in. There were at least 50 martial arts, and each of these was an essential skill that the old man used to teach to any of his personal students. Daniel withdrew his key from the ring given by the old master-at-arms and started to inspect the ring given by the old alchemist. The space of this ring was exactly the same as the one given by the old master-at-arms, but its content was completely different. The items were all kept in the middle of the room and were divided into 4 different piles. One was a chest that contained the exact same number of beast cores placed within the chest inside the first ring, a number that Daniel had guessed the old men had previously agreed upon to give for reaching the 4th rank. The second was another table, above which magic arts and spells were stacked orderly. The third item was a large cauldron. Daniel wasn't sure of what this cauldron was made of, but it gave him the impression that it could resist a meteor strike. Inside this cauldron were 2 thick books. On the first book's leather cover, Introductory Guide to Alchemy, was cleanly written in black, while on the other, a golden writing spelled Horticultural and Botanical Glossary Dash. The fourth and last item was an additional spatial ring. When Daniel noticed this second spatial ring, he immediately pushed his key inside it, and what he saw shocked him to his very core. The space inside this spatial ring wasn't big, only about 20 square meters, but what was interesting about this ring was that it didn't simply contain empty space. It instead contained a tiny living world. On the roof, a small bead that emanated sun essence could be seen shining sunlight on the entire room while slowly rotating in midair. Next to it was another small deactivated bead, from which dormant moon essence could be felt. The ground was covered in dirt, and in each of the room's corners, a small stone-looking bead that emanated earth essence had been placed. Buried in the dirt, right in the middle of the room, was a fist-sized bead whose vibrant wood essence emanated evenly through the entire ground. The dirt was fertile, and on it, tens of low-level herbs had been planted orderly. Daniel recognized these plants as the ingredients for the lowest level of healing pills. Back on the roof, tins of light blue pearls floated quietly, and on each of them, Daniel felt the familiar essence of water. These beads, like the moon bead, were momentarily deactivated, but that couldn't stop Daniel recognizing the essence they emanated. At about 15 meters of height, a transparent, finger-sized bead flew in a random motion, carrying feeble winds with its passage. Lastly, engraved on the roof was a small, colorless bead, whose essence Daniel was unable to recognize. It didn't take long for Daniel to recognize these beads as essence spheres. The essence emanated from these beads was hundreds of times weaker than the water and wind spheres, which the old alchemist had lent Daniel to help him study the water and wind essence. In fact, Their essence was just enough to sustain this 20 square meters greenhouse. The first thing Daniel noticed was that he wasn't able to interact with any of the items inside this ring. So, an idea appeared in his mind. He withdrew his key from the ring given by the old alchemist, and with it, he took the greenhouse ring as well. He then wore it and tried to push his key inside the ring once more. Unfortunately, nothing changed. No matter how many times he tried, every time he pushed his key inside the ring, he would be in the usual ethereal state of a whiff of key. Daniel started to think of ideas on how to interact with the items inside the greenhouse ring. And just as he was about to go and ask the old alchemist, a familiar voice resounded in his head. "It's your spirit," said Sua. After pondering for a moment, Daniel asked, "What do you mean?" Sua snorted within his mind, then continued, "Your spirit is your consciousness. If you want to take a dive in the water, you don't just dip your feet. Sometimes I doubt human intelligence. A spiritual item for spiritual cultivators." Of course, Daniel muttered after realizing his mistakes. He then tried to push his spirit along with his key inside the greenhouse ring, and all of a sudden, he found himself inside the ring once again. But this time, he wasn't inside only as a whiff of key, but physically. The moment Daniel entered his ring, he dropped to his knees and started to puke. This had been the first time for Daniel to shift through different spatial planes, and this reaction was completely expected. Of course, Daniel wasn't aware of that. The greenhouse was an old room, and its atmosphere was created by using a wind sphere which could simulate the same composition of the air in the outside world as it was necessary to grow herbs. Thanks to that, Daniel was able to breathe. This small ring had been the most amazing item he had been given by the two old men. After all, not only was this a portable greenhouse, but also a low-level habitable world. There was only one problem. Daniel had no idea how to get out of it. Inside Daniel's room, a small ring rested quietly on his bed. On another part of the building, both the old men turned their heads at the same time, and their faces cracked up in a smile. "Hee, happens every time," said the old master-at-arms. "You should go get him out." An evil grin suddenly appeared on the old alchemist's face as he answered, "What's the rush?" The two then went back to sip their tea. Back inside the greenhouse ring, Daniel quietly sat on the ground. He hadn't been able to find a way out for the past 2 hours, and he was starting to get a little anxious. Suddenly, an external power forcibly pulled him out of the ring. He found himself back inside his room, and next to him was the old alchemist. "I don't know if I should congratulate you for finding out how to store living things inside a living space, or if I should be depressed about the fact that you found it out on your own skin." "Ha," said the old alchemist before being unable to hold his laughter any longer. With embarrassment in his voice, Daniel asked, "What did I do wrong?" "Key and spirit are your body. If you force both of them inside a living space, you shift entirely inside it. You should have just used your spirit. Your consciousness would have entered the ring as well, but your physical body would have stayed outside." The old alchemist explained patiently. Daniel took the ring from the old alchemist's hand and tried to push his spirit into it. The very next moment, he appeared inside the living space. The shape he had taken was humanoid, but not solid. It could interact with the items within the greenhouse, but it was more like telekinesis than an actual physical interaction. Daniel could feel a connection to his physical body outside of the ring, and he felt as if there was a bridge between space which he could use to withdraw his spirit. He tried to right away, and after a moment, he was back inside his body. "Amazing," said Daniel. He then looked at the old alchemist, and once again he bowed and exclaimed, "Thank you." The old alchemist smiled once more, then left the room. It was now lunchtime, and Daniel wanted to reach his sister and Maya to eat. He put the greenhouse ring back inside the ring given by the old alchemist, wore the 2 rings on each hand, and left the room. The atmosphere in the building had changed since the last night. Everywhere Daniel passed, other people's eyes would move on him. He didn't know it, but the many leaders who had witnessed the cultivation anomaly he had caused had ordered their disciples and sons to keep an eye on Daniel. Unfortunately, they hadn't been reminded to be discreet. Daniel arrived in front of his sister's room in a few minutes, and after he knocked on the door a couple of times, his beautiful sister opened the door. She was strangely well-dressed, and her dress was nothing that Daniel had ever bought her. Unable to find a way to compliment his sister, Daniel said, "Finally, you look like a girl. I was getting tired of convincing people that you aren't my older brother." His joke was interrupted by a kick to his shin. "Thank you," said Rayla with a happy expression. Haha, why are you dressed like this? Is lunch really that important to you?" After giving her a crooked look, Daniel asked. Rayla gave him a derisive look, then said, "Maya and I are visiting the Folding Crane School with Riri and Miri." "Oh, okay. They'll go eat by myself then," responded Daniel before turning around and leaving. Rayla's thin and soft hand immediately pinched his clothes and pulled him back. "Hold on. Finn and Nilo are waiting for you in the mess hall. You can go eat with them, but just a word of advice. Everyone has been acting pretty weirdly ever since last night's light show," she said in a whispering tone. "All right, if I see them there, I'll eat with them," Daniel agreed, as he didn't mind eating with Finn and Nilo. But before leaving, he looked back at Rayla and said, "You look great." Then he left. Rayla's beautiful lips rose into a charming smile, then went back inside her room, closing the door behind her. Chapter 39. Tying up loose ends. A tense period had begun in Daniel's life. He had the resources to cultivate, martial and spiritual arts to practice, and no financial concerns. But even with everything seemingly in place, several pressing matters continued to weigh heavily on him. His outstanding debt, his uncle's imprisonment, and most importantly, Maya's safety. Naturally, some issues were more urgent than others. Paying his debt could happen anytime. Freeing his uncle was important, but not immediately critical. To do that, he'd need access to the Learned District. Maya's situation, however, was the most pressing, and fortunately, it had finally fallen within his reach. Unbeknownst to Daniel, his martial arts teacher was already planning to protect Maya. Still, her safety had always remained at the forefront of his mind. Talent alone had never been enough to keep her safe. He simply wasn't strong enough, yet. But everything changed when Daniel reached the 4th rank. Not because he had suddenly become unstoppable, but because, as the progenitor of dual-path cultivation, he had become an invaluable asset to the entire Carolus kingdom. The old master-at-arms had assured him that he would meet the king someday. When that day came, Daniel planned to ask for the Rulin family's pardon. Unfortunately, it would take time. News of his historic achievement wouldn't reach the capital for at least a month. So, he decided to handle the simplest task first, paying his debt. He left the building and headed to the hotel owned by his creditor. Commoner's Section, 12:02 p.m. Once again, Daniel found himself sitting in the square lounge room of the hotel. It was the same place where he had met the old man he owed. Nothing had changed in the past 2 weeks. The spotless coffee table, the identical couches, the 3 doors, and the counter by the double entrance. The only difference was the girl behind the counter. She wasn't the same one as before. Daniel remembered how nervous he'd been during his first visit, how he had frozen when the door across the room opened and he caught sight of the bodyguards waiting inside. And now, just like before, he was here to settle a debt. Across from him sat a disheveled man, head in hands, hair unkempt, and eyes heavy with sleepless nights. "You shouldn't be here," the man muttered in a broken voice. Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" The man dug his fingers into his scalp, trembling. Through gritted teeth and near tears, he whispered, "This place. It'll eat you alive." Daniel had never seen someone in such despair. He leaned in slightly. "Then why are you here?" The man lifted his head just enough to glance at Daniel before looking away. "A mistake. If only I hadn't agreed. I just want my daughter back." Daniel's breath caught. He leaned back slowly. The man's story was clear now. He had likely borrowed money and lost his daughter as collateral. Daniel could have pitied him if the man hadn't walked in here of his own free will. He was still free, unlike the daughter he gambled away. Choosing not to get involved, Daniel decided to wait quietly for his turn. Moments later, the double doors opened and Rat appeared. "Daniel, back already? Do you have money?" Rat called out cheerfully. But before Daniel could answer, the desperate man stood up. "Sir, I'd like to see the owner. I've found a way to pay." Please, let me speak with him, he stammered, barely holding back tears. Of course. You know we always like to help, Rat said, grinning as he wrapped an arm around the man and guided him into the office. As they entered, he glanced back at Daniel. The young man can wait a few more minutes, Daniel waited. But not for long. Within minutes, screams erupted from the office. Closing his eyes, Daniel tuned into the elemental essence in the air. He felt currents of wind moving through the room, brushing against the furniture and people inside. He could sense the presence of Rat, the two guards behind the desk, Sweet Cheeks near the window, and the old man at his desk. The desperate man was now on the floor, being viciously kicked by Rat. Daniel thought the man must have said something to deserve it, until he sensed a flicker of metal essence in Rat's hand. Crash! The doors exploded into splinters as Daniel walked calmly through the wreckage. Behind him, guards rushed out from hidden rooms surrounding him. Every one of them was a second or third-rank cultivator. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" shouted Rat, still clutching his blade. "What does it look like I'm doing?" Daniel replied coolly. "I'm paying my debt." He walked to the desk and sat down. Across from him, the old man greeted him with a familiar smile. Daniel placed a small bag from his spatial ring onto the desk. 30 gold coins. The old man's smile faltered for the first time, his eyes fixed on the ring. He had been a cultivator once, and he knew the value of a spatial ring. "The contract?" Daniel asked. The smile returned. The old man took the bag without even counting it. "What about the contract?" "I've paid. I want it," Daniel said firmly. The old man laughed. "Rat, did you see him make a payment?" Rat grinned. "A payment?" "No, sir." Daniel smiled faintly. "Of course." Then he gestured to the beaten man. "And what about him?" "Oh, funny story," Rat replied. "He thought he made a payment, too. Life's full of coincidences." Daniel's knuckles cracked. Suddenly, a glowing window appeared in his mind. Primary quest updated. Freedom for all. Description: eradicates slavery from the world. Secondary objective updated. Find and free your uncle. Optional objectives: save the injured man and free his unlawfully enslaved daughter. Kill the hotel owner. Reward: karma plus 750, plus 250, plus 1,500. Failure: karma minus 3,000 time limit. Your uncle will die in 23 years, 8 months, and 27 days. The old man's voice snapped him out of the trance. His poor daughter had to borrow money for her father's medicine. We tried to help, but they took advantage. Sua, show me my options, just the open ones. Daniel thought. Sua laughed. Hey, I like where this is going. Only one's open. Another window appeared. Open approach difficulty. Extreme set fire to the owner's office and burn all contracts. Take the injured man to room 201 to see his daughter. Storm Silver Peak Mine. Kill every guard. Free your uncle. Reward: plus 250%, 1875/625/3750 KP. Daniel studied the details, then thought, no need to do this all at once. He looked at the old man and said, "Okay, this has been fun, but let's get to the point. You give me my contract, the girl's contract, and the three of us walk out. Or you refuse." The old man's smile dropped. "Kid, I don't know how you grew such big balls in half a month, but remember where you are. Maybe I should cut off that finger of yours and write a new contract with a few more zeros." Daniel grinned. "I did say refusing was an option, didn't I?" Flames erupted from beneath his feet, spreading across the room like wildfire. The guards tried to flee, but the fire moved like it had a mind of its own. In seconds, the entire room was engulfed, except for the space around Daniel's chair and the injured man. The man, seeing the chaos, staggered to his feet and tried to leap into the fire to save the contracts. Daniel, impressed, stopped him with a clamp of wet dirt. Screams echoed in the flames. Rat, the guards, Sweet Cheeks, even the old man. One by one, windows began to appear in Daniel's mind. Reap what you've sown plus 210 reap, what you've sown plus 83 reap, what you've sown plus 120 reap, what you've sown plus 91 reap, what you've sown plus 560 reap, what you've sown plus 261 reap, what you've sown plus 424 reap, What you've sown plus 187 reap. What you've sown plus 99 reap. What you've sown plus 163 for the first time. Daniel had killed people marked by negative karma since upgrading his system. And for the first time, he saw the true power of his passive upgrade. Reap what you've sown. Chapter 40. Trouble is on the way. The screams faded, one by one, until silence reigned. A quiet veil of flame continued to consume everything in the room. As the final cries died out, the fire slowly began to recede. Daniel remained seated in his untouched chair. Once the last ember faded, a new sound reached his ears, sobbing. Not far away, the desperate man struggled to escape the prison of damp earth and water. His eyes were fixed on the burned archives behind the old man's desk, his voice choked with anguish. He had tried to free himself ever since he'd been trapped, but the mud would continuously reform around him, like an endless pool of wet clay. At last, Daniel released his control over the elemental essences. The man managed to pull himself out and immediately dove behind the desk, frantically searching the charred remains of the archives. "It's gone. All gone. I'll never see her again," he whispered, broken. The more he searched, the more hopeless he became. Daniel cleared his throat and said loudly, "I know where your daughter is. She's on the second floor, room 201. But the man didn't respond. He was too deep in panic to hear reason. Daniel changed tactics. He walked up, grabbed the man by the waist, and effortlessly lifted him off the ground. "Don't move. I haven't done this with a passenger before," he said. As a fourth-rank martial cultivator, Daniel had complete control over his body. Adjusting for the man's weight was no challenge. But using aerial walking while carrying someone else, that was a bit trickier. The man thrashed in his grip, screaming in terror. "Stop moving. I'm taking you to your daughter," Daniel said firmly, stepping out of the window and into the air. "H," the man shrieked, certain he was about to be dropped. In less than a minute, Daniel descended through the air like he was walking on invisible stairs, arriving at the second floor. He entered through a window, pulled the man inside, and led him through the corridor until they reached a door with a plaque reading 201. From inside, the sound of a young woman crying echoed through the hallway. Daniel opened the door and stepped inside with the man. What they saw made Daniel's jaw tighten. A young woman, bruised and bound by her wrists and ankles, was strapped to the four corners of the bed. Over her, a sweaty middle-aged man, completely unclothed, was having his way with her. Daniel immediately sensed the man's key. He was a third-rank martial cultivator. The frantic father, however, was not a cultivator at all. The moment he saw his daughter, he charged blindly. Startled at first, the middle-aged man recovered when he realized the intruders were only a weeping man and a teenage boy. He stood, reached for an axe near his clothes, but never made it. Daniel's kick landed squarely in the man's gut, launching him through the window and out of the second floor. The man had a red karma marker above his head. Daniel didn't care about his condition. When no death notification appeared, he muttered, "Lucky." The father rushed to his daughter. She cried even harder upon seeing him. He quickly untied her and embraced her tightly. Daniel turned and left without a word, giving them the privacy they deserved. 1,400 kilometers south of Fury, 1923, inside a solitary wooden house, two men sat in silence. One was a robust man with a greatsword on his back. The other, an old man dressed in simple farmer's clothing. The strong man showed unusual deference, sitting respectfully as he waited for the old man to speak. The old man, lost in thought, finally lifted his head. "The Silver Alchemist and Mr. Kai? How many more at the 7th stage? 29 rank 7s. No rank 8s within the city," the robust man replied. The old man returned to silent contemplation. Then he asked, "How long until their king hears of it?" "I'd say no more than a week." Master Kai said a month, but I doubt the Silver Alchemist didn't have a faster way to get the message to the capital, the man replied. The old man nodded, then said firmly, "Leaving it as it is out of the question. You have 2 days. Gather the agents from the surrounding cities and wait. Will arrive within 10 days. You may go. The strong man stood, bowed, and exited silently. Moments later, the old man vanished without a trace. The house was left completely empty. 3 days later, over 3,000 kilometers southwest of Firi, beyond the Sinlia Mountains and the desert beyond, another meeting took place. Inside a tent at the edge of the desert, an old woman and a middle-aged man sat cross-legged on cushions. The man wore a warm smile and greeted the woman cheerfully. "It's been a while. What news do you bring?" Had the silver alchemist been present, he would have recognized the woman as the doctor from the Golden Cauldron, the one who had examined Daniel. Skipping pleasantries, the woman got straight to the point. "Important news. A boy in Firi has discovered how to cultivate both paths simultaneously." Shock overtook the man's face. "What? Are you serious?" "I am. I examined him myself. He triggered an anomaly when he broke through to the 4th rank," she confirmed. The man took a moment to absorb the revelation. Then he said, "We need to secure that boy. Go back. Watch him. Wait for us. We'll be there in about a week." Back in Firi, Daniel sat in quiet meditation, cultivating in his room. 2 rank 3 beast cores finished disintegrating in his hands. He opened his eyes, exhaled, and summoned his profile window. Dan Heel, wielder of the Karmic System, age 14 rank, mid-rank 4, martial cultivation, perfect body, mid-rank 4, spiritual cultivation, perfect connection, karma, 5,202 weapon masteries, details, martial arts, details, skills, details, spells, details, passive upgrades. Reap what you've sown. Time is precious. LV. 1 system upgrades, details. Daniel was still amazed at how many karma points he had earned at the hotel. It was then he realized something. The system didn't just reward good deeds. It also rewarded ruthlessness toward those with negative karma. Now, with over 5,000 points, he began to consider how to use them. He hadn't made a final decision, but 2 options stood out: second chance and reduced cost. He wanted power, or at the very least, a way to survive. Second chance was tempting. But if someone strong enough to kill him got that close, 2 extra seconds likely wouldn't matter. Reduced cost, however, would make every karma point stretch further. After some deliberation, he made his choice. With a single thought, he purchased reduced cost LV. Then he opened the System Upgrades menu again. System Upgrades LV. 1 reap what you've sown equals purchase time is precious LV. 2 is equal to 1,500 KP, active, doubles karma cost, and doubles cultivation speed. Max LV. 10, reduced cost LV. 1 equals purchased, passive, decreases karma consumption by 10%. Max LV. 10, bonus points LV. 1 is equal to 1,000 KP, passive, increases karma earned by 10%. Max LV. 10, second chance LV. 1 is equal to 5,000 KP, passive, once per month, rewinds 2 seconds before death. Max LV. 10, karma times luck equals 30,000 KP, passive, karma influences overall luck. Unlock LV. 2 upgrades at 200,000 karma points now, with reduced cost active. Daniel dropped from 5,202 to 702 points. He decided to spend the rest. With a thought, he upgraded time is precious to level 2. He could now cultivate 3 times faster and consume 20% less karma than before. Eager to test the effect, Daniel retrieved 2 rank 4 beast cores and began cultivating, first without the active skill. As expected, the karma consumption was now reduced. He then activated time is precious. The cores in his hands and the karma in his profile began to drain rapidly, but so did his speed of cultivation. Daniel smiled. Power was coming faster than ever.